She was 4 years old. She hadn't spoken or walked in 365 days. Her father was a cold, powerful millionaire who fired every manny he hired. I was just a nursing student trying to pay my mom's medical bills. I took the job out of desperation. I had no idea I was about to uncover a secret that would make me the heir to a fortune I never wanted. My world had shrunk to the size of a pillbox. One for Mom's heart, one for her anxiety, one to help her sleep. My dreams, once as wide as the New York skyline, had been folded away like old bedsheets, tucked into a closet of forgotten possibilities. Just a year ago, I was Maya Garcia, top of my class in nursing school, practicing sutures on oranges and dreaming of the controlled, life-saving chaos of an ER. Now I was just Maya, the girl whose father's sudden death left behind a mountain of debt and a silence in our tiny Brooklyn apartment that was heavier than any textbook. My life became a frantic loop of survival, waitressing shifts that blurred together, cleaning houses where the dust bunnies seemed to mock my own dusty, abandoned ambitions. Every dollar I earned was a sandbag against a rising flood. My brother Leo was 17, a good kid with bright eyes who deserved a future that wasn't mortgaged by our grief. It was Mrs. Petroff from apartment 3B who changed my trajectory. She caught me in the hallway one evening, my face pale with exhaustion. "Maya dear," she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "You know I clean for the Blakes, the ones in that glass tower overlooking the park?" I nodded, not really listening. The Blakes were like a myth, a different species of human. "They need a nanny for the little girl." She leaned closer. "It's a difficult situation. The girl, she's not well, not since the mother's accident. She doesn't talk, doesn't walk, but the pay, Maya, the pay could solve a lot of your problems." A child who didn't walk or talk, a house haunted by trauma. My nursing instinct screamed, "Trauma!" My empty wallet screamed, "Take it." Desperation won. A week later, I was on the train to the Upper West Side, clutching a worn canvas bag that held my resume, a half-eaten apple, and the flimsy scraps of my hope. Stepping out of the subway was like passing through a portal. The air smelled different, cleaner, laced with the faint scent of expensive perfume and entitlement. Doormen in crisp uniforms stood like sentinels outside buildings that pierced to clouds. I felt like a stray dog in a palace, my worn-out sneakers a disgrace on the pristine pavement. The Blake penthouse occupied the entire top floor. A private elevator opened directly into a living room that was larger than our whole apartment. It was a masterpiece of cold, minimalist design, all glass, steel, and shades of gray. It was stunningly beautiful and utterly soulless, like a high-end architectural magazine spread. A woman with kind eyes and perfectly coiffed silver hair greeted me. This was Eleanor Blake, the matriarch. "Maya, thank you for coming," she said, her smile warm but tinged with a deep sadness. Before I could reply, a man strode into the room. He was tall, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin, and he moved with an energy that seemed to suck all the air out of the space. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept over me in a single, dismissive glance. It was a look I'd seen before on the faces of doctors who thought they were gods. A look that assessed, judged, and dismissed you in under 3 seconds. This had to be Julian Blake. "This is my son, Julian," Eleanor said, a nervous edge to her voice. "Julian, this is Maya Garcia." He didn't offer his hand. He just gave a curt nod, his jaw tight. "My mother is convinced we need another nanny. I disagree. The last 3 were useless. The last one, a child psychologist with a PhD, told me I needed to spend more time with my own daughter. I fired her on the spot." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet it carried a chilling authority. "I work so Lily can have the best. That is my job. Your job is to make sure she doesn't hurt herself. That is all. Do not try to fix her. Do you understand?" I felt my blood run cold. "I understand, Mr. Blake," I managed to say, my own voice sounding thin and weak. He turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into an office and closing the door with a soft, final click. A nightmare. This was a 5-star, penthouse-level nightmare. I was here for my family, I reminded myself, taking a deep, shaky breath. I would not be broken by this man. Eleanor gave me a weary look of apology. He wasn't always like this, she whispered, as if confessing a terrible secret. Before he lost Clara, he was different. He knew how to laugh. She guided me down a long, silent hallway. Lily spends most of her time in her room, in her own little world. The room was a child's fantasy. A princess-style bed, shelves overflowing with expensive, untouched toys, a mural of a fantasy forest on one wall. But the room was silent. No giggles, no music, no life. And in the center of it all, sitting on a plush white rug, was a tiny girl. Her name was Lily. She was 4 years old, a miniature porcelain doll with dark silky hair and huge, empty gray eyes that stared out the floor-to-ceiling window, fixated on a world she couldn't or wouldn't join. In her arms she clutched a threadbare, one-eyed plush rabbit. Her silence was a living thing, a palpable presence in the room that was louder than any scream. My heart constricted. All the clinical detachment I'd learned in nursing school evaporated. This wasn't a case study. This was a child, trapped in a cage of grief. A golden cage, but a cage nonetheless. And in her lost, vacant eyes, I saw a reflection of my own aching loss. 2 different worlds, 2 different wounds, but the same hollow echo of a life that had been shattered. "Hello, Lily," I whispered, couching a few feet away. No reaction. Her focus remained on the city outside, as if everything real, everything safe, was out there, beyond the glass. I knew in that instant that Julian Blake was wrong. My job wasn't just to keep her from getting hurt. My job was to bring her back. The first weeks were a study in silence and solitude. I existed like a ghost within the glass walls of the penthouse. My day was structured around a child that didn't acknowledge my existence. I'd prepare meals she wouldn't eat, read stories to a girl who wouldn't listen, and clean up toys that were never played with. Julian Blake was even a distant phantom. He left before dawn and returned late at night, a wraith in a sharp suit. Our interactions were clipped, functional, and charged with a low-grade tension. He was the king of this silent castle, and I was just a temporary servant he was forced to tolerate. The indifference was, in a way, a relief. It allowed me to focus solely on Lily, but it was also deeply unsettling. The house was a vacuum of emotion, and his coldness was the source of the void. One morning, the tension finally snapped. I was in the kitchen, bathed in a rare stream of sunlight, preparing a smoothie for Lily. I had spoken with Eleanor the day before, and she had mentioned in passing how much Lily's mother, Clara, had loved making her strawberry banana smoothies. It felt like a small bridge to a happier past, a taste of a memory. Julian stormed into the kitchen, his tie askew, barking into his phone. He stopped short when he saw me. For a fleeting second, his expression changed. He saw a normal domestic scene, a woman making a drink for a child in a sunlit kitchen. It was an image of the family he once had, and the mask of cold indifference cracked. Then, just as quickly, it was back again, harder than before. He ended his call abruptly. "What are you doing?" he barked, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm making a smoothie for Lily," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "Strawberry banana." "Don't give her strawberries," he snapped. "She's allergic." I blinked, confused. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Blake. Eleanor. She told me it was her favorite." "My mother forgets things," he cut me off, his eyes like chips of ice. "I know my own daughter. Make her orange juice instead." He grabbed an apple from a bowl and strode out of the kitchen, leaving me standing in a pool of sunlight that now felt cold and interrogating. Tears of humiliation stung my eyes. It wasn't about the strawberries. I knew it, and he knew it. It was about control, about reminding me of my place. He was lashing out at the only person he could, the person whose presence in his home was a constant reminder of everything he'd lost and his inability to fix it. I made the orange juice, my hands trembling slightly. But as I poured it, a quiet resolve hardened within me. He could build walls of ice around his heart, but I wouldn't let him freeze his daughter's future. I started to build my own quiet bridge to Lily, brick by brick, whisper by whisper. I never forced her. I simply existed in her space, a calm and constant presence. I would sing the Spanish lullabies my own mother used to sing to me, my voice soft. I would sit on the floor and build elaborate castles out of blocks, narrating the entire process in a silly voice. And slowly, a change began. A flicker of awareness. She started watching me. Her silent gaze would follow me as I moved around the room. It was a tiny shift, almost imperceptible, but it was everything. The breakthrough came on a gray, rainy Tuesday. The sky was the color of slate, and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the vast windows made the penthouse feel even more isolated. I decided to fight the gloom with absurdity. "Okay, Miss Lily," I announced to the silent room, "prepare yourself for the world premiere of The Unbelievably Clumsy Dinosaur." I sat on the floor and picked up a small, green T-Rex puppet I'd bought at a dollar store. Lily was in her usual spot, hugging her one-eyed rabbit, her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. I put the puppet on my hand and adopted a high, squeaky voice. "Hello, I am the mighty Mr. Roars-a-Lot, and I am here achoo!" I faked a sneeze so comically explosive that I threw myself backward, landing on the plush rug with my legs kicking wildly in the air like an overturned beetle. I lay there, flailing dramatically. The silence in the room was broken by a sound. It was a tiny puff of air, a soft hiccup. I froze, holding my breath. Had I imagined it? Then it came again. A fragile, gossamer thread of sound. It was a giggle. I sat up slowly. Lily had her small hands clapped over her mouth, her wide gray eyes startled as if she couldn't believe the sound had come from her own body. A small smile played on her lips, a ghost of an expression I had never seen before. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I didn't cheer or draw attention to it. I just gave a small, conspiratorial smile and made the dinosaur puppet sneeze again, even more ridiculously this time. Another giggle escaped, a little stronger, a little more real. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Unbeknownst to me, Julian was standing in the hallway. He'd been walking from his office to the kitchen, and the faint, unfamiliar sound had stopped him in his tracks. He had followed it, his heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and a terrifying surge of hope. I only knew he was there when I glanced up and saw him in the doorway. He was frozen, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. He was watching me, lying on the floor like a fool, and his daughter, his silent daughter, with a smile on her face. Her shoulders were shaking with soft, suppressed laughter. The look in his eyes was devastating. It was a cocktail of raw joy, profound guilt, and heartbreaking sorrow. It was the face of a man seeing a ghost, the ghost of the happiness he thought was buried forever. He didn't come in. He didn't speak. He just locked eyes with me for a single, long moment. A universe of unspoken emotion passing between us. Then he quietly stepped back, pulling the door so it was almost closed, and retreated into the shadows of the hallway. Back at his desk, I learned later, he stared at the architectural plans for a new skyscraper. But the intricate lines and numbers meant nothing. The only thing that existed in that moment was the echo of his daughter's laugh, a sound more precious and more structurally sound than anything he had ever built. That tiny laugh was a tectonic shift. It didn't magically fix everything, but it cracked the foundation of ice that had encased the Blake penthouse.
Hope, once a foreign concept in this house, had found a hairline fracture to seep through. I felt emboldened. I started to incorporate more of my nursing training into our days, focusing on sensory and physical engagement. One bright morning, the city glistening after days of rain, I decided to try something bolder. From my worn canvas bag, I pulled out a large inflatable therapy ball, a relic from my pediatric rotation in nursing school. I knew the theory. Gently rocking a child on the ball could help with balance, core strength, and sensory integration. It was a way to reawaken the body's connection to movement in a safe, playful way. "Okay, Miss Lily," I whispered, my heart thumping with a mix of excitement and nerves. "We're going to play a new game. It's called Sitting on the Moon." At first, she tensed as I gently lifted her onto the brightly colored ball. I held her securely, my hands firm on her small torso, and began to rock her with a slow, rhythmic motion. Her little body was rigid with apprehension. I started humming a soft lullaby, the same one that had coaxed out her first laugh. Gradually, miraculously, she began to relax into the movement. Her back straightened slightly, her little legs engaged to maintain her balance. She was still clutching her one-eyed rabbit, but she wasn't fighting me. For a few precious minutes, we were just two people, sitting on the moon, rocking gently in a sea of morning sunlight. And then the door slammed open. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Julian stood in the doorway, his face a thundercloud of fury. He took in the scene. His fragile daughter perched on a giant ball, with me, the nanny, holding her. To him, it didn't look like therapy. It looked like danger. "What the hell are you doing?" he roared. His voice boomed through the penthouse, a physical force that made the air tremble. I froze. Lily let out a small, terrified whimper and immediately recoiled, her body going rigid again. The gentle rocking stopped. The magic shattered. The room turned to stone. This is a basic therapy technique, Mr. Blake. I learned it in school. It helps with her muscle tone and— "You are a nanny, not a physical therapist." He stormed into the room, his presence overwhelming. "I have hired the best specialists in New York, men and women with decades of experience. You think you, a community college student, can accomplish what they couldn't?" Shame and anger washed over me in a hot wave. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to control it. "I am just trying to help. She was responding. She's making progress." "You are not to risk my daughter's safety with your reckless experiments again," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously cold level. He stepped forward and swept Lily off the ball and into his arms. She clung to him, trembling, burying her face into his neck. He turned and left the room without another glance at me. The air rushed out of the room, leaving a hollow, ringing silence. I stood alone, my hands resting on the smooth surface of the therapy ball. A few minutes ago, it had been a symbol of hope, a vessel for a tiny miracle. Now it was the cause of a storm, a monument to my failure. A single tear tracked down my cheek, then another. I wasn't crying because he had yelled at me. I was crying for Lily. I was crying because a door that had just begun to creak open had been violently slammed shut, and I was afraid it was now bolted forever.
I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, going through the motions. When my shift was over, I packed my bag, my heart heavy as a stone. As I walked towards the elevator, I steeled myself for the inevitable. He was going to fire me. I found him in the kitchen. He was standing by the sink, staring out the window at the city lights, his back to me. His shoulders, usually so straight and imposing, were slightly slumped. "Mr. Blake?" I said quietly. He turned, and I was shocked by his appearance. The anger was gone. In its place was a raw, aching exhaustion. His eyes were red-rimmed. He cleared his throat. "Maya," he said, his voice rough. He used my first name. He'd never done that before. I'm sorry." The words were so unexpected, so contrary to the man I thought he was, that I could only stare at him. "I didn't mean to speak to you like that," he stammered, looking down at his hands. It was the awkward, painful apology of a man who never, ever apologized. "It's just, when I saw her on that ball, for a second I thought she was going to fall. The day of the accident. Clara. The car." He trailed off, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I am so scared," he whispered, the words a raw confession. "I am so scared of losing her too." And in that moment, the entire dynamic between us shifted. The armor plating fell away, and for the first time I saw him not as a cold, arrogant millionaire, but as a terrified father. A widower drowning in a sea of grief and fear, desperately trying to keep his head above water. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were filled with a pain so profound it was almost unbearable to look at. "I understand," I said softly, my own anger melting away, replaced by a wave of empathy. "I only want to help her, Julian." He looked up, meeting my eyes. He said, "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And I was wrong. The specialists, the doctors, they saw a patient. You see my daughter. You see Lily." He took a hesitant step towards me. "I need your help. I don't know how to do this alone anymore. I need you to help me get my daughter back." He extended his hand. It wasn't the gesture of a boss to an employee. It was an act of surrender, a plea for an alliance from a man who had spent his entire life in control. I didn't hesitate. I reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm, his palm surprisingly warm. There, in the sterile, silent kitchen of the penthouse, between the ghosts of unspoken grief and the fragile bloom of newfound hope, a partnership was forged. We were no longer boss and nanny. We were a team. From that day forward, the ice began to melt. It wasn't an overnight thaw, but a slow, gradual spring. Julian started coming home earlier. He stopped locking himself in his office. He would appear at the door of the playroom, leaning against the frame, just watching. At first he was an awkward, silent observer. Then he started to participate. It began with a castle of blocks. I was building a tower with Lily, who was now sitting up on her own, occasionally reaching for a block herself. Julian sat down on the floor beside us, an uncomfortable giant in his expensive suit. He asked, "Where does this one go?" Picking up a blue rectangular block. I pointed. "On the tower, to the left. It's a lookout post for the princess." He tried to place it. It slipped. He tried again. The whole tower wobbled. On the third try, the block slipped from his fingers and knocked over half the castle with a soft clatter. He stared at the destruction, wide-eyed, a look of pure panic on his face. He looked at me, then at Lily, ready for tears. Instead, his daughter laughed. A real, clear, bell-like laugh. A look of stunned wonder spread across Julian's face. And then for the first time since I'd met him, he laughed too, a deep, rusty sound as if the mechanism had forgotten how, but it was real. In that moment, surrounded by the ruins of a block castle, they weren't a broken millionaire and his silent daughter. They were just a dad and his little girl sharing a moment of silly, simple joy. He started asking questions,
timidly at first, then with more confidence. What did she eat today? Does she like this music? What stories do you read to her? He started talking to me too, asking about my family, about my studies. He learned about my dad's love for old movies, about my mom's garden, about Leo's dream of becoming a graphic designer. And I learned about him, about Clara, his late wife. He spoke of her in fragments, like a man trying to reassemble a shattered photograph. He told me that she was the one with the life, the laughter, that she was the architect of their happiness, while he was just the architect of buildings. One rainy Saturday, a storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil that was finally being spoken of inside. The three of us were huddled on the living room sofa. Lily, scared of the thunder, had crawled into my lap. Julian sat close, and he began to talk. He told me about the accident. The guilt he consumed him because he had been the one to insist they take that road. He said, "I turned into a monster, Maya. I thought if I could control everything, the business, the house, Lily's routine, I could somehow stop the world from hurting us again. But I was just building a prison. For her and for me." Instinctively, I wrapped my free arm around his shoulders. It was a simple hug, but it was an anchor in his storm of grief. He leaned into it, and for the first time, he allowed himself to truly weep. The tears he had held back for a year finally fell, quiet and steady like the rain outside. Lily, sensing the shift, reached out her tiny hand and patted his tear-streaked cheek, a silent gesture of comfort from a child who was finally learning the language of emotion again. It was me who found Dr. Rivera. I spent my nights, after my shifts, scouring medical journals and parent forums, looking for something different, something beyond the traditional therapies that had failed Lily. I found a pediatric therapist in Seattle, a man who combined physical therapy with music, art, and even animal-assisted therapy. His approach was holistic, focusing on healing the child's spirit, not just treating the body's symptoms. I presented my research to Julian nervously one evening, spreading printouts on the marble kitchen island. I said, "It's a long shot, I know, and it's all the way across the country." The old Julian would have dismissed it instantly, but this new Julian studied the pages intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of hope and fear. "What if we go all that way and it doesn't work?" "But what if it does?" I replied softly, holding his gaze. "What if this gives her the chance to run in a park, to jump in puddles, to live the childhood she deserves?" He looked at Lily, who was humming softly to herself as she stacked blocks on the floor. He squeezed my hand. "Book the flights," he said, his voice firm. "We'll go."
Seattle was a world of misty mornings and towering pine trees. Dr. Rivera's clinic didn't feel like a medical facility. It felt like a cozy lodge, with a fireplace, soft music, and a gentle golden retriever named Maple who greeted them at the door. Dr. Rivera was a kind man with a calming presence. After speaking with us, he knelt down to Lily's level. He didn't speak or try to touch her. He just waited. Lily looked at him, then at Maple, and for the first time with a stranger, she didn't recoil. After his assessment, he confirmed my hopes. "There is nothing neurologically or mechanically wrong with her," he said, his voice gentle. "Her body is in a state of hypervigilance, a defense response from profound trauma. Her system froze to protect her from a pain it couldn't process. She doesn't need to be fixed, Mr. Blake. She needs to be heard." Julian nodded, his eyes shining with tears. For the first time in over a year, he truly believed that hope was real. We stayed in Seattle for 2 months. Our lives fell into a new rhythm. Mornings at the clinic, afternoons exploring the parks and waterfronts. In the quiet world of Dr. Rivera's clinic, surrounded by music, art, and the unconditional love of Maple the dog, Lily began to bloom. She started humming along with the therapy songs. She crawled with purpose. She even started saying a few words, soft as whispers.
Maya, Dada, Maple. Each word was a miracle that brought fresh tears to Julian's eyes. The biggest miracle happened on a sunny afternoon in a park overlooking Puget Sound. We had laid out a blanket on the grass. Lily was sitting between us, watching kites dance in the sky. "Let's try something, sweetie," I whispered, taking her small hands in mine. I looked at Julian, and he gave me a nervous, hopeful nod. I gently pulled her up, guiding her onto her feet. Her legs were wobbly, unsteady, but she was standing. She stood on her own 2 feet on the green grass under the warm sun for a moment that felt as delicate and timeless as a sunset. And then she took a step. It was a tiny, hesitant shuffle, but it was a step. The world seemed to stop. The breeze held its breath. The kites froze in the sky. I gasped, my hands flying to my mouth. Julian let out a choked sound. Lily looked from my stunned face to her father's, a proud, brilliant smile spreading across her face. And then she took another step, and another. Then she tumbled forward, collapsing into my arms, bursting into a cascade of giggles, the sound no longer fragile, but full and rich with life. Julian dropped to his knees and wrapped both of us in a fierce, trembling hug. He was sobbing openly, tears of joy and relief streaming down his face. I was crying too, my tears soaking into Lily's hair. We were no longer 3 broken people. In that sun-drenched park, thousands of miles from the cold, silent penthouse, we had become a family. When we returned to New York, we returned to a different home. The penthouse was no longer a mausoleum of memories. It was filled with the sound of Lily's chattering voice and the patter of her running feet. Her messy, colorful drawings were taped to the billion-dollar refrigerator. Plush toys were scattered across the floor like joyful landmines. One Saturday, Julian drove us out of the city. We drove for an hour, ending up in a quiet, green suburb. He pulled up in front of a beautiful white house with a wide porch and a sprawling garden filled with lavender and wild roses. "What is this place?" I asked. "It's ours," he said quietly, turning off the engine. "I bought it. I don't want Lily to grow up in a glass tower. I want her to have a backyard to run in, a place where she can dig for worms and chase butterflies." He turned to me, his eyes serious and full of a deep, profound emotion. "I came to you as a desperate, broken man. Maya, you walked into the darkest, coldest corner of my life, and you switched on the lights. You didn't just save my daughter, you saved me." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. "I'm not asking you this out of obligation or gratitude," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a single beautiful diamond. "I'm asking because I can't imagine a single day of my future without you in it. I love you, Maya Garcia. Will you marry me? Be the mother to my daughter and the love of my life?" I didn't answer right away. I got out of the car, walked into the sun-drenched garden, and knelt down, wrapping my arms around a giggling, butterfly-chasing Lily. I held her tight, the living, breathing miracle that had brought us all together. Then I turned to Julian, my eyes filled with tears, but a wide, brilliant smile on my lips. "I think I've been all of those things for a while now, Julian Blake," I said. He walked over and took my hand, sliding the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. And so my life changed. I had taken a job to pay for my mother's medicine. I walked into that cold, silent penthouse, expecting to be a temporary fixture, a ghost who would eventually be fired like all the others. I never dreamed that I would find a family. I never sought a fortune, but I had found the greatest treasure of all. Sometimes life's greatest windfalls aren't found in lottery tickets or forgotten bank accounts. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance is a broken heart that you help put back together. I became an accidental millionaire, not of dollars, but of a love so profound it healed 3 shattered souls and built a new world from the pieces.